For now, the big story of the morning is this report from the Centre for Migration Control, which has found that the population in Britain will surge to over 73 million people by 2035, just 10 years, with almost a quarter being first-generation migrants.
Well, I mean, I'm a first-generation migrant. We contacted the government but heard nothing back yet. But the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, and Reform MP Rupert Lowe have already clashed on this morning on Twitter. Rupert Lowe told the Tory MP that he should have done more about migration when his party were in power after he condemned the findings.
So what does that say about our society and, I guess, the future of Britain? What will Britain look like in just 10 years? Former Immigration Minister Kevin Foster joins us now. Good morning, Kevin. Is this at your door, this situation? I mean, is it even a situation to be concerned or worthy of debate? I mean, what's your take?
Well, it's certainly something we should debate. We should always be thinking about what's the future of our country. And, what would it mean to have a quarter of people in the UK as people who came to the UK themselves? We're not talking about people whose parents or grandparents perhaps came as part, for example, the Windrush generation, but people who have migrated to the UK themselves. And also, we've seen the other part of the report was how many people don't speak any English, and particularly relevant with some of the other issues we're talking about today, is that many communities stop women and girls from learning English, partly to ensure then the men in the household are dominant over them. They can't discover what their legal rights are, go and get a job, engage with their bank and think about their own money, those sorts of things. So there's plenty of debates there around this. And also, we do need to have a debate about our economy having been reliant a lot of times on importing labour from abroad, particularly for skilled work, when if we're going to prevent this sort of thing in 10 years' time, we need to now be talking about, well, what's our skills policy? What's our training policy? And ensuring there isn't just the narrative I sometimes faced from a lot of the media, no, not from GBNews, where every time there was a skills shortage, apparently that was because there wasn't a generous enough visa to fill it. Well, we need to be debating, do we have a skills policy able to fill it? And are we ensuring our own workforce, particularly those who could be working but are currently on benefits, are actually able to take up some of those roles?
Well, don't you think this is kind of our own fault? And also, it's more to do with assimilation. So when my parents came to this country, not by the Windrush, by the way, of their own accord, they had to have a set criteria to come here, certain amount of money and certain skills to help to fill. I don't think there was a shortage gap, but they got that old-fashioned thing called a visa. Do you remember those? So they did that. Now, isn't this our own fault that we are not allowing people, helping people to assimilate into this environment? Because even if you have lots of people coming from other countries, as long as they keep the prevailing culture of that place alive, and I do agree with mass migration, it was ridiculous using people from abroad to fill in shortages when we should just train our own people. But isn't this simply our own fault? We don't make sure people assimilate. We don't do anything, really. We, in fact, create multicultural little hubs where people can continue in their own way, but in this country.
Well, Nana, you're right to say that we do need to focus on how people assimilate, how people integrate into society. And actually, some coming to the UK, for example, those from Hong Kong who are British nationals overseas, assimilate relatively quickly and easily into UK culture because, of course, they see themselves as British, they generally speak English, they're generally quite highly educated. Yet in other scenarios, we see particularly those, for example, who perhaps come over in small boats or that. Again, that can be a much bigger challenge, hence why we need to deal with those problems. But a lot of this comes back to, our economic model. How do we link up the discussion about skills training with migration policy? Because, for example, my own party today saying that it will bring in an annual cap. Well, great, but how does the rest of policy build to supporting that? I.e., what's your skills policy? What's your policy in terms of the labour market overall to reduce the actual demand for overseas? Because, as I say, we see virtually every sector will suddenly come with a plea for another visa whenever there's a problem. Well, how are we robust enough to say no to that and also make sure that we've got the labour supply we need domestically?
Kevin, you, of course, worked under Priti Patel in the Home Office. Do you ever, with respect, do you ever wake up in the morning and look at stories like these and warnings and figures like these and think, yeah, we really messed that up in government. We've got something to answer for here?
Yeah, I think, Ben, so I look at the last 18 months the Conservative Party was in. For example, the skilled worker visa does actually include an ability to impose a cap. You still have to apply for a certificate of sponsorship. Certainly when the numbers started to rise, that could have been deployed. There also could have been, certainly in the last 18 months, I think some of the comments from Mr. Sunak this week about basically the problem was stop the boats was the slogan, not coming up with a solution. Well, no, the problem was you didn't come up with a solution. No one really cared what the slogan was if you actually dealt with the problem. So certainly it's one of the things that looking into any future general election, as I've just touched on, from the Conservative Party announcing, yes, we'll have a cap, great, OK, but you're going to need to have the whole range of policy, as will, by the way, reform. If that's the policy line, I expect they'll be going down as well. How do you wean the economy off cheap labour from abroad? How do you avoid sectors having the skills training plan to bring people in on a visa, not to start 5-6 years before and training our own workforce? Remember, for example, we had a shortage of lorry drivers, which, by the way, lorry drivers in shortage across the whole of the developed world. Road Haulage Association argued a visa was the solution. It wasn't. The solution was actually improving training domestically.
Well, that seems really obvious. I don't know why your government didn't do that. And when they had control of legal migration, they just let it go out of control. Everything you're saying right now is perfectly logical. I'm just, I think a lot of people are just very disappointed with the Conservative Party on their failure. Thank you very much, Kevin Foster. He's the former Immigration Minister. Also joined by political commentator Judita De Silva and Dr Renee Honderkamp, GP and medical writer, in the studio. Welcome back to you both. Should we talk, Dr Renee, about this migrant explosion? By 2035, I think a quarter of the population are going to be children or, well, first-generation migrants, basically.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a very interesting stat, isn't it? I think it was 25% of the population were straight into the country, and migrants bringing with them their culture. It's slightly different to this, because if these people assimilate into society and bring up their children to be part of our culture, I don't have a problem with that at all. What I do have a problem with is if that culture remains with them, they don't adapt to us, they don't assimilate. And most of the evidence that we have at the moment is, assimilation is not happening. We are a collection of ghettos in London now. Yeah, the multiculturalism, that's exactly what it is. Judith?
I just think I would like to see, more of the breakdown, because there is a immigration problem across Europe, in the UK, guaranteed. But you have to address the problems that have made it balloon, which is a point they also raises, that if you keep importing cheap labour, why are you doing that? Yeah. You've got to improve the incentives. Like we talked before about incentivise people to actually go back to the workforce, look at your benefit system, address everything holistically, and then the dependency to bring foreign cheap labour in depletes. If you're not having those kinds of conversations, you're just basically saying there's a problem, but you don't want to actually speak about the actual issue that's causing the problem.
I agree with all of that, but that goes the other way as well, where businesses cannot rely on cheap labour to supplement their businesses. We have to be tough as a government and say to these businesses, no, you've got to pay people from this country a living wage that they can actually survive on.
But then they uproot the business and take it elsewhere.
No, they should be incentivised. So if the government incentivised businesses to take on people who are already in this country, then they may not uproot and go elsewhere.
But then this is the ugly conversation that most people won't have. There are it has gotten to a point that even young people, people who are disabled, people who are disenfranchised, if you want to motivate them to do certain jobs, there are jobs they just don't want to do. You don't want to clean the toilets in Heathrow Airport at 2 a.m. They just don't want to do it.
I think it's easy. You take away some of the benefits from people who are just sitting there refusing to do things.
Then you create a whole different level of contentious
because in no other... Literally, if you went to Ghana, and said, I'm not going to do that because my girl sit on... There aren't benefits there. Lots of countries do not have this nanny state, which I would call that the nanny state of benefits, where, I don't feel like working, I've got this, I've got that, I'm not going to work. Well, if you don't work and you could work, then you don't eat, or you don't have this. Why should we all work really hard?
But you see, that's a very good point. You're trying to cultivate a mentality that isn't organic to to country naturally.
No, it is.
Because in Nigeria, in Ghana, and all those countries where you don't have benefit systems, and basically you work or you don't survive.
Judita,
exactly.
That did exist here.
It did exist.
In the 1960s, when men had to queue up to get their unemployment benefit. They used to cover their faces because it was shameful.
Yeah.
I was brought up being told you clean toilets before you claim benefits.
Yeah.
That has gone, but it did exist.
Well, you are perfectly positioned with what you do in your work. When you look at the kind of patients you have, when you look at young people, do you think you can engineer them to get that kind of mentality back?
Well, money would engineer them. Money is a great motivator.
No benefits.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry,
Motivate.
Juditha, I remember...
Absolutely motivate them.
I remember that kind of ethos that Renee's talking about in the early 90s when I was growing up. I was a young lad. I remember people, parents of friends who had to go to the job centre to sign on, and it was such a taboo. It was shameful, as you said. Now, though, there seems to be they revel in it on TikTok.
It's expected.
They say, look how much benefits I'm getting. Look how much housing benefits I'm getting. I get all this money for not having to work. It seems to be some sort of thing you can flaunt around.
I think we all...
Where's that come from as well?
No, I think we all fundamentally agree, but I always say that there are conversations you're refusing to have which will actually address this problem. That's the point I'm trying to make. Because until you have those conversations and address that, your minimum wage has to be higher. Yeah. Where do you get the money from? You've got to tax the rich. But, they'll run away and go to a different country. Right, so you're in a whirlpool of problems.
Well, I don't think you are. I don't think that necessarily equates. Because I think you're overtaxing the rich, which is pointless, because they will go because they're mobile. And then you're being over-generous with people who aren't working, who could work. And you're expanding the parameters of people who can claim these benefits. I think it's absurd, and a lot of people are enjoying it. A lot of people I know who are on benefits, they could work.
I know somebody who has been unemployed for 10 years who says he wouldn't take a job for less than £48,000 because that's how much benefit it gets, and he'd rather sit at home playing on his PlayStation and smoking dope all day. And those people exist. They're not the oddity. The problem that we have is this is a Ponzi scheme. It's a massive Ponzi scheme, and the little bit at the top that's paying for everyone is getting smaller and smaller. All Ponzi schemes collapse.
Yeah, and those people at the top are getting very disillusioned. I'm not just talking about millionaires, multimillionaires. I'm talking about just general, just the high earners. Like they are getting very disillusioned and upset with the way things are going. And as you said, propping up a big proportion of the nation who's quite frankly just can't be bothered.
Yeah.
And they'll go elsewhere.
I think it goes back to the same point that it's going to be a very protracted period of hurt when you reprogram society to understand that there is a meritocracy to general existence. That is the only way you start to deplete the issues of immigration, because it's the easy way out for so many people.
Part of this is our fault. I wrote on the GBC website last week about Gen Z. Don't blame them, blame us. When we started letting our kids stay at home and not charging them rent the day they left school, that was a problem because they didn't learn about those kind of responsibilities in life. And someone very close to me is 33, still living at home, he's not mine, without paying rent and working.
I know a few.
So we have done this to our kids. We've taken risk out of their lives. We've told them that life is always nice. They don't need to have any trauma. Unfortunately, life isn't always nice. We do have trauma and we have to work and pay for ourselves.
I think it was the day that we allowed people, it's OK if you've come second. Don't worry about it. Everybody's a winner. No, you're not. You didn't come first. The winner comes first.
You're the fastest loser.
Yeah, that's fine. Everyone gets a prize.
I love
everyone
that
gets a reward. No, they don't. Not everyone gets a prize or reward. It's a competition and you've got to play to win.
Is it redeemable, though, this situation, or are we past the point of no return, do you think?
We're redeemable because all you have to say is, like when I take my smartphone from my daughter, or I don't give her pocket money, she sure as hell sorts out her act then. So those who are sitting there languishing on benefits at our expense need to be told.
But a Labour government are not going to tell these NEETs to get off their bum and go to work, or they don't get
But
money.
they are, actually.
No, they're not.
They are. Some of them
Watch and see.
I mean, I'm just listening because it's something that should be done. You hope will be done, but I don't see it being done anytime soon.
It will take a lot of work. Juditha, Dr. Renee, thank you very much.